territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. Aujourd'hui,
Today we're continuing with our fourth study on Arctic sovereignty, security, and emergency preparedness of Indigenous peoples.
this panel, we will be hearing from Mr. Robert Hubert from the University of Calgary, from Sarah Brown, CEO, Northwest Territories Association of Communities, and from Mayor Rick Daigneault from the northern village of Beauval. Je voudrais vous rappeler des exigences.
I'd like to remind you about the recommendations from the Board of Internal Economy concerning distancing and the wearing of masks.
For an orderly meeting, I would like to outline a few rules for us to follow. Members or witnesses may speak in the official language of their choice. Interpretation services in English, French, and Inuktitut are available for the first part of today's meeting. Please be patient with the interpretation. There may be a delay, especially since the Inuktitut has to be translated into English first before it can be translated into French and vice versa. The interpretation button is found at the bottom of your screen in either English or French or Inuktitut. If interpretation is lost, please inform me immediately and we'll attend to it and pause for a bit. Before speaking, please wait until I recognize you by name. If you are on the video conference, please click on the microphone icon to unmute yourself. For those in the room, your microphone will be controlled as normal by the Proceedings and Verification Officer. The raise hand feature at the bottom of the screen can be used at any time if you wish to speak or alert the chair. When speaking, please speak slowly and clearly. When you are not speaking, your mic should be on mute. A reminder that all comments should be addressed through the chair. And this is for the members. When you ask a question, please direct it. Otherwise, if it's assumed to be for all three, there may be a long pause because nobody knows who should start. So please direct your question. Alors, sans plus tarder, nous
Without further ado, we will begin with our first panel.
benefit of the witnesses, you will have 5 minutes each to make opening remarks, and then we'll proceed with a question period. So without further ado, I would ask Professor Robert Hubert from the University of Calgary to kick us off. Professor Hubert, you have 5 minutes.
Well, thank you very much. First of all, let me tell you what an honor and intimidation it is to come before such an august body in this regards to talk about such a critically important topic. I've got two sets of comments to offer in my first 5 minutes. The first one is, of course, the traditional addressment of what we mean by sovereignty and security as it pertains to emergency preparedness and the Indigenous peoples of the North. Now, one of the big problems that we face whenever we have any discussions about sovereignty is that it is one of those terms that everybody uses, but few people really understand what it means. Sovereignty, of course, refers to the ability of a government to control a specific landmass and maritime region. And so for Arctic context, that means the control of the maritime zones. That means the internal waters of the Northwest Passage. We will be having a sovereignty issue as it comes forward in regarding to continental shelf. And as it pertains to the roles of the Indigenous peoples, we are going to have to be dealing with the terms of sovereignty as it pertains to the land claim settlement regions and what that means in terms of control, particularly control of maritime navigation through the Northwest Passage. In terms of security, we talk of two things. We talk about human security, which of course many members of the preceding experts have addressed. And we have also talked about the issue of...
One moment, please, Mr. Hubert. Madame Gill?
Ms. Gill, the interpreter said that the quality of the sound is not good enough to continue with interpretation. So, thank you. Thank you very much.
It has to do with the ability of the interpreters to translate your language. Is your microphone, have you set up on Zoom with the microphone being your headset microphone?
Yes, I have. I'm looking at it right now. And on the microphone, is this any better is this a better quality?
Okay. So, Madame Gill, est-ce qu'on peut essayer de continuer?
Ms. Gill, can we try and continue to see if it's better? Of course, yes. I'm sure that the interpreters will inform me.
Perhaps speak a little bit more slowly and a little more loudly, and that will help. Thank you.
Okay, sorry about that. So we have the issue of sovereignty and security. And the security that I want to talk about is, of course, the security that is often overlooked in our discussions of emergency preparedness, and that is military security. The reality is that the issues in the Ukraine have illustrated one of the greatest dangers that we have pretended have disappeared, and that is the possibility of nuclear war. We have heard this several times coming from President Putin as he has made threats to NATO and the NATO members, and it is a threat that we need to take serious as it pertains to emergency preparedness. Now, once again, many people will say, well, it's got a very low probability, but the reality is before the pandemic hit us, the discussion of the possibility of a disease that would kill over 27,000 Canadians and have the impacts that it had was, of course, viewed as a low probability. Putin has not only threatened nuclear war, he has built the necessary weapon delivery systems and weapons to carry it out. A scenario is very easy to come up with. He is losing the war in the Ukraine. He wants to hit the resupply regions. And in doing so, before he hits them with the tactical nuclear weapons that he has to blind the Americans. To blind the Americans, he has to hit the air bases in Anchorage, and he has to hit the Thule radar sites. And so that presents Canada with a very real and explicit threat. Now, in terms of emergency planning, that means that we need to be able to deal with the Arctic and with the Indigenous peoples and their communities that no longer has communications. The EMP blast that would occur in such a strike means that any electronics would be down. The Russians also have the capability of cutting all cables, so that communications would be down. So this would be a long-term cut, and this would be a problem that, of course, the southern sections are also dealing with in Canada. The other parts that we have not prepared for in Canada is any form of an emergency preparation for the residual radioactivity that would inevitably occur. We used to have plans during the Cold War when we recognized a similar threat. But in 2022, most of these plans are either non-existent or are so old as not to be practical. Now, I come back to the point. This is of a low probability, but as we have experienced through pandemic, to not be prepared for the very worst means it only becomes that much worse in our overall context. And so moving ahead, we of course have to be able to begin and prepare for the existential threat that climate change will present for all Canadians, but Northern Canadians and Northern Indigenous peoples in particular. But we also at the same time have to prepare for the threat and the possibility of a limited nuclear exchange. It is unfortunate, but it is one that I do think the evidence is pointing increasingly to. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Hubert. We'll now go to Sarah Brown. Ms. Brown, you have 5 minutes.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can. Go ahead, please.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, my name is Sarah Brown, and I represent the NWT Association of Communities, and I thank you for this opportunity to speak to you. We represent all 33 communities in the NWT, and as such, we are planning to discuss comments in 4 key areas. First of all, the use of smart military investment as the backbone for building the new North, and this does relate to some of what Mr. Hubert was saying earlier. Certainly, all of the aggression in the Ukraine is certainly creating angst about Arctic sovereignty for residents of the NWT. It's been raised in the press and in the Legislative Assembly. Canada devotes fewer resources to the protection of northern and Arctic regions than any other major power in the world. Russia's most recent assertion of national interest in the at the North Pole has already caused general concerns in the NWT, and the actions in the Ukraine have certainly increased this concern. We need to leverage military investment This would lay the foundation for sustained growth and prosperity in northern communities while supporting Canada's long-term economic and military interests in the region. We need a vision for the North that integrates an increased military presence with building healthier communities, protecting the environment, and diversifying the regional economies. This includes projects like the extension of the runway in Inuvik. The pandemic more recently has highlighted the North's vulnerability due to telecommunications challenges, whether it was online schooling, telehealth, or virtual meetings. The development of a more robust communications network could not only assist the military and assert sovereignty, but they could greatly assist communities in enjoying a level of service that the rest of Canada takes for granted. These conflicts have potential to recast the North as we know it and to bring about dramatic and wide-ranging change. The convergence of these issues has reawakened national interest in the North. The role and effect of these transformations on northern communities must now be part of the federal decision-making process. Item number 2 is to develop a long-term plan to invest in northern infrastructure. Canada needs to provide the funding to build the infrastructure necessary to sustain communities and support new industry, tourism, research, and military activities. Recent federal investments are helping, but they are not enough to build the modern infrastructure and transportation linkages that northern communities need to grow stronger and to be more secure. In particular, these investments need to respond to Indigenous aspirations in the North. This includes investments in hydro and all-weather roads. Every effort must be made to complete these projects using local resources and contractors. Third, we need to make Canada's North the world leader in climate change adaptation. Like the rest of Canada, NWT communities have been experiencing increased risk to wildfires, and ice jams have been causing unprecedented flooding for the last several years. For the second year in a row, we have seen large and small communities alike impacted in ways they never have been before. Responsibility of communities is to provide the first layer of response during an emergency, but communities are going to require more and more support from the territorial and federal government moving forward. Further, there is a need to clarify roles in communities in terms of community and Indigenous governments. Massive environmental change has the Arctic emerging as the poster child for the real-world impact of climate change. Northern communities have so many more and different risks from climate change than southern Canada. They're not limited to flooding and wildfire, but also include permafrost thaw, melting winter roads, eroding riverbanks, thawing coastlines, extreme weather, reduced access to the land, overland flow, and the list goes on. The costs with only a few of these risks has been articulated. For example, the cost of decay of permafrost on public infrastructure is in the order of $1.3 billion, or $51 million per year. This is outside the capabilities of both community and the territorial governments, and this is just one risk and only public infrastructure. Climate change funding to date has focused on data collection and design. It has been hugely oversubscribed in the NWT, and we have been focused on treating traditional and local knowledge with respect. There's soon going to be a need for far greater amounts as we head into the capital phases of adaptation as communities attempt to take a proactive approach. Canada has the opportunity to make sure that the North is a world leader in climate change adaptation, and we've done recent work to demonstrate that the greatest economic stimulus from dollars spent is at a community level. Every $1 million spent by federal, territorial, and community levels create 6, 7, and 13 jobs respectively. This clearly demonstrates the benefits to providing funding through community governments. Further, this leads to developing and fostering northern capacity. The longer we work on the climate change file, the more it has become evident that tackling climate change through risk-based partnerships is really the best approach, which leads to recommendation number 4, which is to make partnerships official policy. Leaving community Indigenous governments to try to become experts in and to tackle the various challenges on their own is unrealistic. Further, it leads to much duplication. We have used the risk-based partnership a couple of times, first on working to do a geotechnical review of the community assets of the 7 most vulnerable communities to permafrost thaw. This has proven an effective approach with a lower burden on the community, and then data can be aggregated. We have more recently done a joint application to the DMAF fund with the GNWT and the 29 impacted communities to complete fire breaks.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. If you could wrap up very quickly, please.
Sure. So finally, I'll just go over highlight the 4 things that I actually found in a 2010 report saying the same thing, as to use smart military investment, develop a long-term plan to invest in northern infrastructure, make Canada's North the world leader in climate change adaptation, and make partnerships official policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Brown. We'll now go to Mayor Nick Daigneault from Beauval. Mr. Daigneault, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm both humbled and honored to be able to present today from a small village in northern Saskatchewan. I'd like to extend my thank you to our MP, Gary Vidal, for the invite to present today. As mentioned, I am the mayor of the northern village of Beauval, located roughly 500 kilometers north of Saskatoon, just to give some context. We are at the center of 2 major highway arteries, Highway 155 and Highway 165, which makes us a centralized location for Northwest Saskatchewan. I've had an interesting 10 years in my time as a politician in northern Saskatchewan. Previously as councillor, I was much involved in the emergency measures coordination for the wildfires that happened in 2015, which was a lot of wildfires surrounding our community, not necessarily near, but close enough to cause worry. And with the smoke evacuations, where we had a significant number of community members who needed to evacuate south. Just in our recent years as well, we've had wildfires break out near the community, but none, of course, to the extent of 2015, where we had to do some minor emergency coordination as well with the Saskatchewan Protection Agency. We've since developed a great partnership with Saskatchewan now that they've amalgamated all their resources into the SPSA. So we've been coordinating efforts on the ground, creating a good emergency team, a lot of lessons learned over the last few years, and we've decided our village staff should become a very pertinent part of that emergency planning as well, and not to rely too much on volunteer services in the community. So we made sure that the resources were flowing to the community and accurate information was being presented and disseminated to the community through social media posts, as well as radio spots on our local TV radio station as well. So we've had some very good communication resources to utilize to get that proper information out to the community. During this recent emergency where we had the COVID pandemic, we had a real opportunity to create a government-to-government relationship with the Métis Nation of Saskatchewan. For the most part, this relation started off very strong, and we were very proud to sit down with our Métis government to discuss the strategy for the communities. Again, some background there. Most of the communities from Green Lake all the way up to La Loche along Highway 155 are predominantly Métis communities. This also presented an opportunity to work with our surrounding First Nations. And so what we did was we created Beauval as a staging area for the whole Northwest region to create a regional approach to the pandemic response. Through federal supports and relief funds, we were able to procure PPE gear purchases as well as donations, food supplies for the homes so that we had food security during this tough time where stores and grocery stores in the surrounding area were closing. And we also were to be able to procure rental RVs that were deployed when isolation events occurred. This was very, very much appreciated at the time when we had households that are already experiencing overcrowding, and we did not want to experience an outbreak in the household. So they were able to isolate the specific case and move to an RV for the time of isolation. The partnership, for the most part, was working quite fine, obviously, until the months had passed, and then unfortunately, politics tends to get in the way of sometimes great ideas. And it appeared that agencies wanted to be the hero of the day and claim credit when it came to news media time. This, of course, was not our intent at the time. And it didn't become an issue until later part in the pandemic when requests for resources and the sharing of resources became unheard. And this became a concern for our community. Municipalities are not necessarily given any sort of emergency response budget, so a lot of unrecoverable costs went into managing our communities and to protect ourselves from an invisible threat. As you all know, this is not a wildfire situation where we can see and assess the threat. So we've had to create some very impromptu responses, such as creating blockades, where we've had to close other entrances and exits from the community and sort of funnel everybody through one exit and entrance. So they had to kind of be screened coming in and out of their communities. We were not the only community to do this, as this happened as well as in Isla Crosse, Saskatchewan, Buffalo Narrows, Saskatchewan, and also La Loche, Saskatchewan. We also had to hire nightly security who did patrols to make sure that there was individual households were following the emergency measures laws that were created by the province for families to stay within their own bubble and no mixing between households to curb the pandemic. So we had to create that nightly security that would create logs that would come to mayor and council in the morning and would sometimes warrant a visit from one of our community leaders or the RCMP themselves to remind households and educate them that we are in the midst of a pandemic and rules need to be followed. The introduction of the CERB money also did make matters a little bit worse, especially in a community that's also already struggling with addictions. So this money, which was well intended, obviously for those suffering job displacement or loss, was being abused by so many individuals who were already on some sort of social assistance program that would further cause, incidences for our community and breaches of the pandemic orders.
Your Worship, Mr. Daigneault, I'll have to ask you to wrap up at this point so we can get on with the questions.
You bet. So one thing was we wanted to ensure that there's a regional approach to this as the communities banded together at the beginning of this pandemic. I really would like to see some sort of federal response to bring all First Nations, Métis communities, Métis governments, and municipalities together, as we do believe in the Northwest here we have the ability to create a very strong regional emergency response team, and we have the resources and people to work with the existing Saskatchewan Protection Agency as well. So I'd like to thank you for the opportunity to present this and give you a ground level idea of how we responded. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mayor. We'll now proceed with the first round of questions. I have Ms. Stubbs up for the first 6 minutes. Ms. Stubbs, you're on.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you. Thanks to all the witnesses for being here. Of course, this motion is very diverse and wide-ranging. So just for my portion of the questions, I'm going to focus on the security threats relative to the people and to the communities in the North. Dr. Hubert, in early April, you testified at the Public Safety Committee that Russia is a, quote, existential threat to Canada. And you said there that it is reaching the potential level of a crisis. You touched on this again today, and your testimony there noted that the most important element of that threat that has been largely ignored is the Russian way of war, and in particular, the potential use of nuclear weapons and long-range missiles. And Russia's willingness to do so in order to achieve its policy objectives, putting it on a direct collision course with NATO. I think your testimony at Public Safety pertained to a general threat to Canada. I wonder if now for this committee, as you did in your opening remarks, you could add some more details and context to the threat, in particular for the people and the communities in Northern Canada. And also if in addition to that, you might outline perhaps 3 to 5 top priorities that governments could move on immediately to get prepared.
Well, thank you very much for this opportunity, and thank you for paying such close attention to what I've been arguing for a long time. The Russians have been a threat since the return of an authoritative government in Russia. And this is, of course, Putin when he becomes acting president in 1999. What many people do not know is that one of the first decisions that Putin gave, and from a military security perspective, was to develop a series of weapon systems as early as 2002, 2003, that would challenge the American anti-ballistic missile system. In other words, they were clearly developing the capabilities to engage in the series of wars that they have been engaged: Chechnya, Georgia, Syria, Ukraine 2014, and Ukraine 2022. How does it pertain to the North? Well, it pertains to the North because the Russians clearly see the Americans as the greatest challenge that they have to achieve their policy objectives. In order to meet the American challenge, they have developed a series of weapon systems: hypersonic, Avangard missiles, underwater autonomous vehicles that are all designated to take out the American capability of being able to strike back. And the ability of the Americans to strike back is based on their northern capabilities, which we share with the Americans under NORAD. So if the Russians were, in fact, to strike the Americans to prevent and allow them then to escalate in other parts of Europe, that would automatically spill over into the northern component of Canada. This is what's leading the Americans under the leadership of General Van Herk, who's head of NORAD and of Northern Command, to talk about under the concepts of integrated deterrence. He has publicly stated that the Americans do not have the capabilities of detecting the new Russian delivery systems, and these new Russian delivery systems are in fact designed to take out the American ability to know and the American ability to respond. Thule and Almendorf are two of their most important bases. These are in the north. Canada, as a member of NORAD, also facilitates the Americans through the cooperations of our forward operating bases for our aircraft. And as such, our NORAD radar systems under what used to be known as the DEW line, but the North Warning System is also part of it. So therefore, a Russian strike to blind the Americans would inevitably require a strike on Canadian targets as well. Now, once again, I want to make this clear. This is not a high probability, but it is still something that is clear in the Russian way of war. You asked me, what are the priorities that we should be doing? Well, the first one, of course, is to take serious NORAD renewal. We, of course, have, in terms of our detection system, a 1985 technology in terms of our radar. We need over-the-horizon radar systems. We need an improvement in our satellite capabilities. I dare say that just simply having the systems we have in place now, never mind maintaining them, is problematic. We also have to show the Americans that we are serious. This committee is looking at sovereignty. As much as the Russians are the direct and existential threat to Canada, for the reasons that I've just outlined, there is, of course, the ongoing possibility, as illustrated by the comments made by Senator Sullivan 2 weeks ago, that American political leadership may see us as a freeloader. And when that, of course, happens, the Americans will then act on their own to provide them with the security that is necessary. And so, therefore, that becomes a sovereignty threat for all of Canada, but particularly for Northern Canadians, because if the Americans feel that they have to do something in the North, they will act accordingly when they believe, as I believe that they already understand, the Russians to be existential threats. So NORAD and showing our seriousness is the first one. The second issue, of course, in terms of the response of this committee, is to ensure that we have the proper emergency plan in place. As I said, our response in terms of COVID... Professor
Hubert, you're going to have to wrap it up. It is 6 minutes, so please wrap it up.
Well, the two is the NORAD, get the procurement, that means the F-35s, and get the emergency plan in place that goes beyond just simply what we've been able to respond to. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Just before we go to the next witness, Mayor Daigneault, the IT people here have asked if you would lift your microphone, your head microphone, just closer to your nose level, if that's possible. There we go. Okay, thank you. Next speaker is Mr. McLeod. Mr. McLeod, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you to the presenters today. Very interesting discussion for sure. I'm glad to see Sarah Brown joining us, and she always brings a lot of energy and many good ideas forward. And I wanted to ask about the North preparedness when it comes to emergency situations. In the last few years, we've certainly in the Northwest Territories have experienced quite a few floods in the communities. I think last year we had 7, and we had several this year. There's always the threat of forest fires, and many of the calls that I get is from community leaders, individuals that are asking for information on the process as to who's responsible for what, even when it comes to looting in the communities after communities are evacuated. Sometimes the leaders will be asking for the rangers, but the rangers don't have it in that mandate. So I want to ask Sarah if she thinks that additional training opportunities and additional resources would help ensure that there is no confusion in the emergency situations that we've been experiencing.
Yes, thank you very much for that question. And certainly it is an ongoing challenge for us every time we come up against a new risk or a new challenge. With the roles and responsibilities are very, very unclear. We would definitely benefit from additional training, even if all it does is establish relationships beforehand, so that people know who they're dealing with, know who they're speaking to, understand the communities, understand the territorial resources, understand the federal resources better before they go into it. Certainly, the pandemic really demonstrated that. It was an uncontemplated a risk and an event, and we were really making things up as we went along. But because we had relationships, we were able to, for example, convene regular meetings of mayors and chiefs in the territorial government. And so the more training and that happens in advance, the better set up you will be everybody will be to respond effectively.
I have another question for you, Sarah. I want to know if you have any suggestions for the government on supporting infrastructure, especially in our smaller Indigenous communities, that could help mitigate the damage that they may face from national disasters. We have a lot of communities that are under threat from flood. We have a lot of communities that are now being challenged by erosion, and we're still seeing communities that don't have the berms or the dikes, or in fact, they don't have the ability to relocate major pieces of infrastructure. Some of them are very important pieces of infrastructure like power plants and sewer lagoons and water treatment plants that are still located in flood areas, and when those go, then the whole community, whether the house is flooded or not, you don't get water or power, you're out of luck, and that's something I think that seems to be lacking.
Yeah, absolutely. And one part of the challenge is we are leaving community governments to sort these issues out on their own and not to support them in doing those mitigation measures and helping them with hiring an engineer, for example, to come in and do some of those analysis. that's where I really strongly believe that we have to embrace this partnership model. Like, we should have a working table of everybody who's got a flood risk, and so they can learn from each other. They can identify knowledge gaps. They can identify engineering gaps. They can then go look as a group for funding, and try to start addressing those issues. But when we leave communities to just sort of struggle on their own with individual risks or a collective of risks, these are already people who are extremely tapped out. Many of them work 80, 90 hours a week. We have huge turnover, all those things. And so we definitely have to do a better job of supporting them in doing the mitigation that will reduce the impacts of these natural disasters.
My last question is, I wanted to ask you if you could expand a little bit on your recommendation for partnerships as a official policy. Could you explain what that really means?
And very quickly, please.
Yes, I think we've all experienced all the work that we do in silos, whether it's territorial, communities, federal. We have to move away from that approach. We have to see this as a collective problem, and that we need to work together. And we will achieve so much more. We're a small little jurisdiction here ourselves, and our communities are that much smaller. And if we don't work together in partnership, we will all be in trouble.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Nous irons maintenant à Madame.
We will now go to Ms. Gill. You have 6 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. First, I'd like to ask a question to Professor Hubert. I know that you already spoke to the committee on national defense, and you talked about sovereignty and defense. And I'd like to know whether there have been any improvements over the past few years in between 2010 and 2022. Thank you.
You're still on mute, Professor.
Sorry about that. Thank you for the excellent question. If I'm being honest, I think, if anything, the cupboard has been demonstrated to be bare. If we look at the period between 2010 and 2022, and I would just move the bar over to 2007, we have had two instances where vessels have in fact entered the Canadian Northwest Passage without permission, and in fact, we were not able to stop them. We had in 2007 the Berserk II that sailed from the eastern side of the Northwest Passage all the way to Cambridge Bay. And finally, because community leaders were able to alert the RCMP to the arrival of this vessel, we were able to arrest the participants who did have criminal records and deport them a second time. The second example, of course, occurred in 2021 when we had the New Zealand Kiwi yacht sail through the Northwest Passage. Again, we had closed the Northwest Passage, as is our sovereign right if they are in internal waters, because of the pandemic, and he refused to acknowledge our ability to close it, and he sailed through. Again, Coast Guard made a call that it was probably going to be safer to allow the vessel to go through rather than risk having them come into a port and perhaps pass the virus on. But nevertheless, I think it illustrates clearly that we do not have the ability to fully know when these vessels enter into our waters, and that we do not have the ability to stop. What is important is that it was the local communities, the Indigenous communities, that in fact that alerted us to us. And we get back to Sarah's point in terms of the ability to be able to share as a response in terms of being able to defend our Arctic sovereignty. I think as we move forward, this inability to have a capability of knowing, the inability of coordinating, once again, going back to the very important point Sarah said in terms of our ability to talk to each other, and our willingness to politically act against those that are against our interest, we basically haven't really demonstrated very much in terms of a political will to enact upon this.
Thank you very much. I have a complementary question for Mr. Hubert, but also for Ms. Brown and Mr. Dagnon. with regard to holding a territory, and we know that in the Nordic area there is a low number of inhabitants. What measures can be taken to ensure that that we populate, that there are people that live in this territory? In other words, I'd like to hear the response from all three witnesses, starting with Mr. Hubert.
Well, it's difficult, of course, to try to have any type of population movement, particularly when there are the challenges of the economic capabilities within the region. And that's probably going to be the greatest challenges that the Nordics have faced, and that I dare say that Canada will face on this regards. I would add one important thing here, and it goes back to a point that Ms. Brown raised in terms of communications. One of the things that I want to bring out is that one of the ways of ensuring communications goes is through an existing body known as the Arctic Security Working Group that will in fact facilitate precisely the type of call cooperation that your question gets to, but also that Ms. Brown was talking about.
Ms. Brown, would you like to answer the question? And then Mayor Daigneault.
Yeah, that's the ability to increase our population and then and thus increase our eyes on the ground is an interesting one. It's one we struggle with all the time, that I'm not sure that that's entirely what needs to happen. I think instead, I agree with Professor Hubert that we need to be doing a more efficient job of communicating and knocking down those silos. This is a complicated and expensive place to live, and I don't know that we're going to attract a whole bunch of folks here as a response to security threats.
Et si je peux me permettre, avant que...
If I may, before Mr. Daigneault responds, I'd like to draw to your attention the problem of retention of people, keeping people there as well, staying in their community. So Mr. Daigneault might like to conclude.
So, Mr. Daigneault, if you want to answer that question, you've got about 20 seconds.
Yeah, I'd just like to, I guess, take the time to reinforce the points that were already made earlier, is that as a community, we need those resources to hire those engineering firms to create those new subdivisions, and to further look at our official community plan to find out that we're not building in flood zones or whatnot to make it difficult for future and new members of our community. So those supports are needed.
Thank you. We'll now go to Ms. Idlout for 6 minutes.
Thank you. First of all, I wish to welcome you for your presentation. Very informative. But I will direct my question to Robert Hubert and only Robert Hubert. I will ask you, do you agree that investing in Inuit and infrastructure such as paving airports are very important investments in protecting the Canadian Arctic sovereignty?
Question. Where the real strength of empowering Indigenous communities and the pavement and the improvement of infrastructure of the communities is, of course, we know that from a geographical perspective, it is in fact the Indigenous communities that go the farthest north. And it is those communities where, in fact, that we have to be making better plans in terms of having a capability of knowing what is happening around, be it in terms of over-the-horizon radars, be it in terms of the modernization of the North Warning Site, be it in terms of the airports that we now have for our forward operating locations. All of those, of course, entirely need and require the participation of the Indigenous communities. They need the participation also of the non-Indigenous communities, but given the geography that exists, that has to be front and center in terms of how we are able then to have that capability to move. To be honest, We need a flexibility. If war comes, the plan that we have, the infrastructure that we have at this location is the first thing to go. And you need that resiliency, which means you have to have more than what you think you need.
Thank you for your response. It makes sense. I will ask you again. In the past, the ITK president, Rosemary Guptana, had a definition of Arctic sovereignty. And her definition was, quote, Arctic sovereignty means having the ability to exercise one's culture based upon the many characteristics that define a people, such as your language, your traditions, values, history, and geography. Guptana says, it means sovereignty over decisions that are being made about environmental issues, climate change, wildlife, and anything that affects Inuit in particular in their lives. Do you know how sovereignty is set in Inuktitut? Or do you agree with that?
Just to further emphasize your point, I'm currently doing research on, or writing a book on the voyage of the Polar Sea, which was one of the most important elements of challenging Canadian sovereignty. And I have to tell you, in 1985, one of the strongest voices in terms of how we understand what sovereignty is for came from the ITK and other leaders such as our current Governor General and others who spoke very eloquently. Sovereignty is all about the ability of the government of whatever state it is to allow its rules, its norms, its values to exist, to be promoted and to be protected. And therefore, the definition, and once again, I go back to some of the writings that Mary Simon had in 1985, to be able to say that the whole point of why we were concerned about the Manhattan in 1969, why we were concerned about the Polar Sea in 1985 was precisely because the people, and in particularly the indigenous people, have lived on the land and ice. And therefore, what we want the sovereignty for is the protection of that lifespan. And that, in fact, is the essence of sovereignty by itself means nothing as far as I'm concerned. It is what you do with sovereignty, why you want sovereignty. And so therefore, the expression that you have just provided is the so what? Why do we bother even worrying about protecting Arctic sovereignty if we're not going to protect it for a purpose? And I think that what you have just quoted is the beginning of a long establishment in terms of what Inuit understand in terms of sovereignty.
Thank you very much. We'll now go to a shortened second round, and we'll start with Mr. Vidal. Mr. Vidal, you have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to thank all the witnesses as well today. As my colleague, Ms. Stubbs said, it's a very wide-ranging topic we're talking about today, and I want to focus on emergency preparedness for a minute. And Mayor Dayo, I'm going to direct my question to you based on your testimony. You talked about some of the jurisdictional issues. You talked about the Métis Nation and the First Nations and the municipalities in that region of Northwest Saskatchewan coming together specifically around the pandemic. And your closing comments when you had to end, you talked about a regional response, and I just want to give you the opportunity to flesh that out a little bit more and maybe just give us some guidance on what that regional response might look like as you bring together those levels of government you talked about, as well as the provincial and federal government. What might that look like that would help you in the future to be more proactive and be better prepared for whatever future emergency you might face?
Go ahead, Mayor Daigneault.
Thank you, Gary. I had it in my notes, but unfortunately I had to rush through it. So thank you for the opportunity to to get into detail on that. When we first started the regional pandemic strategy, it started out as simple as putting together a toll-free number through our communications company, SaskTel, so that all mayors and emergency coordinators can all jump on the same phone line and coordinate regionally that way. It since obviously grew to something much larger, such as the sharing of resources, using Beauval as a staging ground for all PPE, RVs, etc., to be disseminated from here and deployed. And also it even grew even further so that each individual community didn't have to attend a one-on-one with the SPSA. We created an ad hoc regional EOC with a coordinator, which was also hailed from Beauval, who served as our go-to centralized person to get all of the resources together, including the medical health officer for a region, the director of the Saskatchewan Protection Agency, get them all into the same Zoom call and share that information so that everybody left with the same message at the end of every day that the call was done, that we all went away with the same message to take back to our community, the same strategies that we offered back to agencies to take to the government and the province and also the federal governments as resources were coming in. Like you said, there's a lot of moving parts and there's a lot of resources that each government can offer. And we wanted to make sure that us as the boots on the ground, we're giving them directly those suggestions so that we can work together. As a region, all our communities have a kinship and we capitalized on that. And it's just expanding that concept and coming up with an actual legal plan, because as you all know, there's an Emergency Preparedness Act for the province, and it's just bridging the gap between federal jurisdictions such as First Nations and the Métis governments and the municipalities of the province that needs to be put pen to paper.
Thank you. And I'm going to drill a little bit there, Mayor. You're talking about bridging the gap, putting pen to paper. So, I mean, in the context of kind of a post-mortem, you're going back and analyzing what worked and what didn't work. And so could you maybe just be a little bit more specific on the things that need to be better so that you would be better positioned next time to, whether it's the 2015 wildfires or the pandemic of the last couple of years, what very specific recommendations would you suggest for kind of that regional group that should be, as you said, put pen to paper to learn what we can?
Definitely. Thanks, Gary. We would definitely need to come up with that framework as to what it looks like so that all levels of government can make those suggestions. Obviously, what we're giving up when it comes to the emergency measures is our authority to the committee. And with that means, what is that? What exactly are the devil in the details there? What does that mean? What authority would the regional emergency coordination team have? And then where would us as the mayor and councils and chief and councils also step in? So a lot of those little details need to be hammered out in order for us to all feel comfortable at the table as to what authorities the regional EOC would have and what authorities we would retain. And obviously financial resources, what are we committing into this regional EOC? And then obviously the frameworks around responses. What do we have in our backyards in terms of resources and what are we lacking? I mean, we need to really get into that level of detail in order to make this work.
Thank you, Mr. Vidal. We'll now go to Ms. Atwin, who will share her time with Ms. May. You have a total of 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll go as fast as I can. Thank you to our witnesses today and for this incredibly important and fascinating discussion. I'm going to continue down this line around communications because I can't think of something kind of more important in the event of a disaster. So maybe if we could talk a little bit, maybe Ms. Brown, where you represent such a collective of communities, are there issues around, cell phone coverage, Wi-Fi access? How does communication, generally happen as far as if there was an emergency situation? How would your members, get to know what's going on? Thank you.
Yeah, we definitely have a lot of challenges around communication. We have some communities have very compromised Wi-Fi, harken back to dial-up. We have a lot of challenges with cell coverage. It's getting better, but it does not exist between communities. It only exists in communities, which in itself creates a lot of problems. And as well, we have a vulnerability in that right now there is no redundancy. So we are often offline for days at a time, even in a major center like Yellowknife, where somebody has dug up our cable in northern Alberta or northern BC, and we're offline. So we're already very, very vulnerable. And so if you added the layer of some sort of event, it would just be so much more so.
And thank you. And I'll ask Mayor Dagneault as well. You mentioned using kind of local radio, social media. Have you received any feedback from your community members about how effective that was, or if it reached kind of the majority in different demographics?
Yes, thanks. I'm glad you brought that up. We've also had to rely on the Good Neighbor system as well, which means that I know not everybody logs into social media, especially a lot of our elders. They rely on what we call the moccasin telegraph. So we asked them if they could at least go knock on their window or their door and spread the information door to door. We're a small community, so we know who's who, and we know who would struggle with logging into a Facebook or any other social media. And so, like I said, the Good Neighbor system is also informing them word of mouth, going directly to their hosts.
And I'll pass it to Ms. May now. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Jenica. I'll try to ask this question as quickly as I can to Professor Hubert. You talked about the governance structures, federal and territorial and First Nations governance. I'm also looking at the circumpolar governance and the question of the Arctic Council and whether it can play a role or if it's fatally flawed by Russia, for instance, right now being in the chair. Does it hold promise for security and sovereignty for us?
Well, the Arctic Council was specifically designed not to deal with security, and that was one of the requirements that the Americans had. It is my belief that the Arctic Council will now transform the way that the G7 or G8 transformed into the G7. It's too important for the rest of the countries, but the reality is that the Russians will never come back to an Arctic Council that includes 7 of the members being NATO members. Remember, Finland and Sweden are now pursuing NATO membership, and so therefore they're not going to come. Does this mean that we now have the opportunity to give the Arctic Council a greater human security role? I think that there would be a great appetite for addressing many of the issues we're dealing here with the Emergency Measures Act. Remember, the Arctic Council is the only international organization that has given standing to the indigenous peoples of the North. No other body until UNDRIP comes forward even gets that consideration in international law. So I would say that, yes, we're going to have an Arctic Council. It will be different, just as the G7 is different. But we have an opportunity here if we are willing to go forward with bold leadership.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Do I have time for one quick additional question?
You have one minute.
Okay, good. And I don't know if this would go to Sarah or Sarah Brown or somebody else knows, and this is much more granular. I've heard it referenced that the Arctic Rangers are a line of defense in our north, but they don't even have as I understand it, we don't even buy their equipment for them. They don't have snowmobiles provided. What is the status of the Arctic Rangers, and what should we be looking towards given an increased security threat in the north?
I'm afraid I couldn't provide that kind of granular detail. I could certainly research it and get back to the committee.
The one person you need to then get to talk to in that regards would be Whitney Lockenborough, who's the honorary lieutenant colonel for the 1st Ranger Unit, who's probably written every single book there is on the Rangers, and he would be completely up to date on that.
Thank you very much. And I understand that particular person is coming next week, so we'll be at the committee. So now we'll go to, let me see, Madame Gill, vous avez 2 minutes et demie.
Ms. Gill, you have 2.5 minutes. Thank you very much, Chair. I'd like to again ask a question to Mr. Hubert and Ms. Brown and Mr. Dagneault, based on their own priorities and how can the fact that they are involved in protecting the security in the north, and how could that have a positive effect on other potential crises, for example, political, military crisis, but also climate crisis. We talked about infrastructure. So I'd like to know how can the one help and support the other, and also the issue of communications that we just heard about. I don't know if who wants to start. Perhaps Ms. Brown.
Well, thank you very much. Certainly, it's, again, those connections. How can we make those connections happen? How can we already be dialoguing when we go into a crisis so that all we're doing is changing tracks? We're not trying to reestablish relationships. I think that that's the most important thing. And as I mentioned a couple of times about those communication tools, making sure they're there, making sure that there's access to internet, cell phone, all those things are absolutely critical in the success of any response.
If I may, there is one solution that has a great promise in this regards. I've already mentioned the Arctic Security Working Group. In 2005, they had the Director of Health Canada come forward, and they had a discussion in which they presented to the body. I attended some of the meetings in which they outlined the possibility of a pandemic of a respiratory disease that basically cripples the country. Now, we did a tabletop. We tried to have communications, but it basically stopped at 205 or 207 when the meeting was going on. I think that the Arctic Security Working Group and other bodies like it have to do two things. First of all, they have to think of the bad problems. We cannot just simply assume these problems will not come. The second part then becomes practice. If we are able to have the type of ability and the funding to actually see how bad we do things, and it's to see how bad we do it is when you have the best practice. So go forward and say, okay, we've got this problem that we don't think is a problem, pandemics. Let's pretend it actually comes and see what the communications are like. And if we'd had more than a tabletop in 207, I dare say we would have had a much better preparation in 2020. And so you need that big thinking, and that comes just from a constant ability to look at these problems and the problems as they're coming. And then you have to have the funds necessary from the federal government to say, okay, territories, Indigenous governments, municipal governments, we're going to give you a bit of an open budget here to address and play out the problem. You do that, and I guarantee that the communication issue that Sarah is talking about and many of the central problems that we have, we will be that much better prepared for it.
Thank you very much. We'll go to Ms. Sidlaut for 2.5 minutes.
Thank you. I have a question for Hubert. You did not respond. We're talking about infrastructure and for the Inuit communities. But we also know that the Inuit need resources, finances, so they can be active in security measures and be a part of the security force.
No, absolutely. The first part, of course, and it gets back to a point that was made. You need resiliency in the communications. That means just simply having one cable, one means of internet is not good enough. When Yellowknife goes down, you can well appreciate the problems that you are talking about, the outlying communities. The government, and this has to be funds from the federal, because the territories will not have the necessary resources, have to ensure that you have multiple means of information access and availability. But the other part is transportation, and this goes into the infrastructure capability. You need to have that ability to move. That means, of course, ensuring that you have the runways beyond the forward operating bases, but you have the community's means of being able to get to each other in fact, of an emergency. This is something the Russians did prior to the resumption of the war in 2022, is make sure each and every one of their northern airfields were brought up to full standards. And so go beyond the 4 forward operating bases and think in that context. And the other one is, of course, the marine communications and navigation that is going to be coming as climate change becomes more of an issue of opening up the waterways. Think in terms of multiple communications, navigations, and connections. And that ultimately means infrastructure for the northern communities.
Thank you very much. That concludes our first panel. J'aimerais remercier nos invités.
I'd like to thank our witnesses, Professor Hubert, Mayor Daigneault, and Sarah Brown for their testimony.
We started a little bit late, but thank you. You will help the committee in its work, and we very much appreciate it. With that, we will suspend just for a minute as we prepare for our second panel. Thank you. I would like to welcome the three witnesses we have. Mr. Richard Chimuka, Senior Fellow at the Macdonald-Laurier Institute. We have in the room with us Grand Chief Derek Fox of the Anishinaabe Nation, and as well Mr. Michael Mackay, Director of Housing and Infrastructure of the Anishinaabe Nation, also in person. And so the way we work this is that you will each have 5 minutes for opening remarks, and then we'll get into questions. And so without further ado, I'd like to invite Mr. Richard Chimuka to make his opening remarks for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Honorable Chair. Thank you also the opportunity to speak among this distinguished panel of guests. I'm going to confine my comments today towards the harder security aspects of northern security, geostrategy, the Canadian Armed Forces to ability to respond to them, as this is really the areas of my expertise. The security dynamics within the Arctic are going through a fairly significant shift. Prior to January of this year, one could argue that Arctic posed an increasing challenging security environment, given the growing geographic accessibility of the region due to climate change, and the steady increase of tensions between regional powers, most notably with Russia. From 2010 onwards, the Russian Federation, in particular, invested in its northern capabilities, including the development of integrated Arctic bases, an increasingly powerful icebreaker fleet, and modernizing its nuclear submarine force. Russia's ambition is at least to provide a strong presence in the North to assert its sovereignty, which includes contested claims with Canada. Relatedly, they have also announced a refurbished strategic nuclear force with exotic new weapons, several of which were intended to degrade NORAD capabilities in a potential nuclear conflict. At the same time, diplomatic engagement in the Arctic has been holding steady, at least compared to other areas of our bilateral relations following Russia's invasion in Ukraine. The war in Ukraine over the past 3 months has significantly altered the strategic landscape. However, much of the capabilities that Russia utilizes for Arctic security have not been employed in that conflict, and thus remain a potential threat. Russia's assets available to operate in the north will likely plateau for the time being, whether due to lack of funding or lack of access to key components from Western countries. If the current regime remains in power, Russia is likely to remain hawkish in pressing its sovereignty claims, which would become a flashpoint for future conflict. There are also much less acute challenges that require response. Disputes over and access through Canadian territory in the north require the government to possess the wherewithal to maintain its sovereignty over the region. These disputes are often with close allies, such as the United States, and they are exceedingly unlikely to result in direct military conflict. While diplomatic tools remain the most likely way to resolve these issues, Canada still must maintain the civil and military capabilities across the entire spectrum as a potential response. With that being said, Canada's capabilities in the north are growing, but significant deficiencies remain. The recent announcements on defense spending, specifically targeted towards northern security and modernizing NORAD, are welcome, but these only address certain challenges, and they are far from certain they will be deployed under the current estimated timelines and costs. For example, the government has recently announced the selection of the F-35 as a replacement for the CF-18. However, there are doubts where it can phase in these aircraft according to the schedule it has announced. The Navy's ongoing acquisitions of the Harry DeWolf class ships will be an excellent addition to Canada's northern presence. These vessels will assist in increasing the country's northern presence and make major strides in providing a wide range of capabilities to coastal communities above the Arctic Circle. Lastly, Canada faces some key deficiencies. As I discussed in a recent Hill Times article, Canada's fixed-wing search and rescue fleet seems to be in trouble due to the selection of the C-295. The aircraft has numerous technical and performance deficiencies that make it unlikely to enter service in its intended role, which may require a third competition to fill this capability. Furthermore, Canada has no effective counter to Russian even allies' nuclear submarines, which can only be effectively countered by other nuclear submarines. I hope this gives a good overview of the general state of the security in North. I'm happy to elucidate any area during question period for this meeting. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Shamuka. And now we'll go to either Grand Chief Fox or Mr. Mackay. You have 5 minutes combined, the two of you, so please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to first of all acknowledge that we're on the unceded Algonquin Anishinaabe territory. I appreciate this opportunity to appear before this committee on behalf of the 49 First Nations of Anishinaabe-Aski Nation. Emergency management is critical for First Nations, especially our remote communities. It has been 6 years since the tragedy in Pikangikum First Nation that claimed 9 innocent lives, including Amber Strang, an infant just 5 months old, and 3 generations of her family. There have been many other similar tragedies, including the fatal house fire in Standing Lake First Nation in January that claimed the lives of 3 children. These fires were preventable tragedies, and lives will continue to be lost without meaningful action. The Ontario Chief Coroner's Table on Understanding Fire Deaths in First Nations examined fire-related deaths in 20 communities, including 7 Nan First Nations over the last decade. The report confirms what our leaders have been saying for years. Too many innocent lives have been lost in tragic house fires that may have been prevented if safety measures and prevention services were in place. The report found First Nations children under 10 had the highest fire-related mortality rate. Communities with no year-round road access had the highest number of fatal fires and fire fatalities. 86% of fatal fires in First Nations communities had either no or non-operational smoke alarms in the house and structure. Fatal fires were the primary source of heating. Where the primary source of heating was the wood stove, wood heater were the highest in communities with no year-round road access. Everyone should be able to go to bed and expect to see their families in the morning. It is unacceptable that our children are at high risk. Despite numerous reports over the last few years, our communities continue to suffer losses from tragic house fires. These reports state that our communities need resources, training, updated equipment, the ability to service and maintain equipment and related infrastructure to deal with and prevent fires. In the last decade, we've seen minimal improvements in these areas, primarily due to the lack of will to support proposals and initiatives. In 2021, NAN identified the following priorities for major improvements for fire safety and prevention. Increase fire safety awareness and education through Amber's fire safety campaign. Implement a standardized service delivery model across NAN territory. Ensure community infrastructure and housing conditions are acceptable and built to code. These are solid recommendations that require action. Forest fires. House fires are not the only threats to our communities. On-reserve First Nation in Ontario are 18 times more likely to be evacuated due to floods, forest fires, failure of community infrastructure, and severe weather events compared to the general population of Canada. More than 80% of these emergencies occur in the NAN territory. These emergencies are only increasing in frequency, severity, and duration due to climate change, and are especially devastating in remote communities where the lack of services, capacity, and infrastructure is detrimental to the efficient response and recovery. Last summer was a record-setting forest fire season in Northern Ontario, and particularly in Northwestern Ontario, which is NAN. Thousands of NAN community members were evacuated because of smoke and fires threatening their health, homes, and safety. But despite these threats, some community members risked their lives by staying behind or returned to their communities rather than remaining in seriously inadequate conditions in faraway locations. Evacuated community members from one community were forced to stay in a school gymnasium without adequate washrooms or showers. For those who didn't evacuate, they stayed in their communities without access to basic health services and policing. The distances that remote communities must travel for evacuations can be immense. For example, last year, hundreds of Deer Lake First Nation residents were evacuated to Cornwall, Ontario. The direct overland distance from Deer Lake to Cornwall is 1,500 kilometers. This is further than Ottawa to Corner Brook, Newfoundland. They were allowed one suitcase each, not knowing when they'd be able to return home, not knowing if they would have a home to return to. This year has already seen an increase in communities struggling with flooding due to higher than normal amounts of snow and precipitation in the winter and spring. This has put homes and other infrastructure, including water treatment plants, at risk for damage and loss. For two fly-in communities this spring, floodwaters covered the only road to the airports, their only source of incoming groceries, clean drinking water, and the sole means for medical and emergency evacuation. When a tragedy such as a house fire, threat of forest fire, an outbreak or flood happens, the Chief Council and support workers must work at a maximum capacity and require immediate assistance from all available agencies. Emergency situations often lead to leadership and frontline workers becoming overwhelmed and requiring additional support and relief. For fly-in communities, there are no nearby communities or municipalities with road access to provide quick relief, equipment, or additional supports in times of crisis. This reality caused undue stress a few weeks ago when multiple communities in NAN were scrambling to get sandbags into their communities. Due to shortages in Northwestern Ontario, sandbags needed to be purchased and flown to tribal councils and as far away as Winnipeg. States of emergencies are often declared due to widespread trauma and the persistent significant shortage of services and resources. Declaring a state of emergency should eliminate barriers to accessing accommodations and resources that are desperately needed, including wraparound supports such as healthcare and mental health services. But this is not always the case. We see a continued failure from the government to respond, which raises questions if the government understands or cares about the threats to our First Nations. The emergency management concept we have presented outlines this and is the direction that the province and both levels of government should be headed in. The creation of a First Nations-led emergency management service is a crucial part of saving lives and infrastructure in our Nan First Nations, with the goal to establish and apply the same or higher standards for fire safety and emergency management as elsewhere you see in Canada. This is the foundation for action towards a holistic and successful approach to emergency management for Nan First Nations. Partners must acknowledge these issues and gaps and move forward together for a successful and culturally appropriate service delivery model that supports and empowers our First Nations communities. It must be understood that underfunding or shortchanging proposals for prevention ends up unnecessarily increasing the risk of both death and loss. The time for talking about this is over, and as I always say, leadership is action. Thank you. Miigwech.
Thank you, Grant Chief. We'll proceed with one round of questions, and we'll start with Mr. Shields. Mr. Shields, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Schmook, you were referring to a Hill Times article that I've read that goes back with the history of the Buffalo, the Hercules, the Leonardo, and up to the Airbus. This has been 20 years we've been looking at this. Could you just refresh us a little bit more on where we can go with this? Because I understand the F-85, but the workhorses that we need in the north is a different plane than the F-85. What do we need to do to get this done? And do you think it can happen within the next 5 years?
Thank you for the question. I think it's unlikely, given the situation that we're in, that we will see any change in the capabilities that are available. Because of the unavailability of the C-295 Kingfisher for operational service, the Royal Canadian Air Force has been forced to utilize its C-130 fleet, specifically H models, to operate in the north and provide fixed-wing search and rescue capabilities across Canada. The problem is that the C-130 fleet has a life limit. It can only be used for a certain amount of hours before which it cannot be refurbished any further and then must be taken out of the service. So as we see right now, we haven't seen a gap in the capability that is being provided in the region. And given the unlikely outcome that the C-295 will operate, right now the government has actually said that it will not have entry into service at least of 2025. In reality, I do not believe it will actually meet that time frame at all, and we'll have to find a different solution. I don't believe that there will be any ability for the Canadian Armed Forces to change the current makeup of its fixed-wing search and rescue capability in the country. The problem is after 5 years from now, it's going to need a solution because it will not have enough flight hours left with the existing fleet to do search and rescue and all the other stuff that it's required to do, i.e., providing transport within Canada or outside of Canada, anything. So it needs a response. So the government must outline pretty quickly here, what's its response going to be if the C-295 is unable to actually meet the requirements that's been set out to do.
So when we've heard in communities about the barriers for economic development, about the challenges with health in the north, the transportation issues, at this point, you're saying it's handling it, but I would guess you're saying it's not handling it well, or we've got a real problem until the next plane comes into service, which is another issue in itself.
So the C-295 is specifically focused on fixing search and rescue, right? It's a rapid response capability for emergencies, whether it be, let's say there's a crash or there's somebody's in loss or ships in distress, right? And that's specifically what that capability is focused on. The problem is that in order to make up the gap that the C-295 is unable to fill, it's utilizing other capabilities, specifically the C-130 fleet, which is a really important capability. It's probably the most important capability that the Canadian Armed Forces has in terms of providing, sovereignty in the north, or aid for refugees in Africa. It's an extremely heavily utilized fleet, and the whole idea of the Fixing Search and Rescue program was to remove its requirement, the C-130 fleet's role in fixing search and rescue. What the exact opposite has happened is actually now completely is the complete capability for doing fixing search and rescue. So in particular, the C-130s are used in emergency management roles within the North. And now it is not, it's in the future, it may not be able to do so because we've used so many hours filling this gap.
Right. So the C-295, so the process to get a plane to replace it, you must be then familiar, from what I've read, of the shortcomings in the process to get a replacement then.
Yes. Certainly there was, in 2004, there was a process to replace the Buffalo. And at the time, there was only one aircraft that was identified by the Royal Canadian Air Force to replace the Buffalo at the time, and that was the C-27J. It was basically scrapped at the time because they wanted a competition, which later, the revised competition that came after that, then loosened the restrictions, and then that allowed the C-295 to actually be selected. Which has now become a serious problem because that aircraft is seemingly unable to meet the requirements of the Canadian Armed Forces to do this mission.
And some of those deficiencies would be critical when you're talking about the North and distances. I'm looking at the information.
Absolutely. Many of them are specific to the North. The icing system issues, issues with power to weight. There are likely problems to do with its rough field handling capabilities, which really restricts its ability to operate in the North from unprepared strips or gravel strips and whatnot.
So when we're talking about sovereignty in the big picture, I mean, the F-85, as you mentioned, that's one level. But without the other aircraft in between, the gaps that occur for many things is the overuse of one particular airline and how it's stretched is going to put a risk for all sorts of things in the North.
Oh, absolutely. And I think that this is probably one of the areas that there should be little disagreement about. I mean, you can have disagreements over whether or not, what are the security risks, posed by Russia or China or whatever. However, providing search and rescue, I think, is probably one of the most common public goods that everybody would agree upon. And the lack of ability for Canada to actually have this fleet coming up to over 20 years now to actually replace it is pretty shocking. I would consider that this should have been something that should have been easily dealt with and early with very little sort of disagreement. And yet here we are today, and we're now looking at possibly a third competition on this topic.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. Mr. Badaway, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm going to preface my comments by saying this. One of the reasons why I brought this study forward was to, in fact, create that action that Mr. Fox, you spoke about. And with that said, what we need as a committee is for a report to go to the House, to the minister, to react, and then therefore create that action. So I'm going to make a statement, and I'm going to ask you a question. And the reason why I'm going to make the statement is because I need it on the record. And I need the analysts to include it in the final report. So with that, and when it comes to emergency preparedness, it's been mentioned in the past meetings that, one, to move forward, a team has to be established within your community. And that team has to embark upon planning, an emergency preparedness plan. With that, and as part of that, infrastructure capacities have to be recognized and identified. The infrastructure supports needed during emergencies have to be identified, hopefully in advance, but sometimes it doesn't happen until the actual emergency happens, understandably. Identifying the advanced ancillary services, such as your hazmat, your PPE, as was mentioned, mutual aid with neighboring communities, if there are neighboring communities and other services that might be available to you. Communications within your team, and of course, outside. Lots of times when an emergency happens, the community doesn't get prompted. If it's a water situation, for example, what prompts the community to actually identify or recognize that there's an emergency? So what opportunities and what infrastructure can you have in place to prompt the community? It could be an air raid siren, for example. And then based on hearing that, going to a certain radio station, battery powered, of course, that then prompts them to do what needs to be done. With all that said, and with respect to the investments that have to be made, one, it's the community strategic plan leveraging emergency preparedness and ongoing infrastructure updates, not just for emergency services and preparing for those situations, but also leveraging those investments for overall infrastructure capacities, even when it's times that there's no emergency. So that can include fiber, it can include water, wastewater, it includes asset management, declarations, habitat and community restoration after the fact, indigenous procurement, governance priorities, and of course with us, the communication between cross ministries. So with all that said, 2 questions. Do you agree with that premise so that the analysts can actually include that on the record? And secondly, any further comments to that?
And who are you directing it to?
Mr. Fox.
Do we agree?
And or Mr. McKay.
Hello.
Mr. Fox?
Yeah. Good afternoon. Thank you for the statement. And yeah, we definitely need that service. And before I proceed, I'm gonna shortly ask Mike McKay, our lead on this, to speak to some of the things you said. But yeah, emergency preparedness is much needed. We've you know, I don't think that there's much plans in place for our territory. It's fairly new with what's happening in the north. We got the forest fires, the flooding, situations that have never occurred in the history of NAN, and I think those things are going to increase. So I believe that we need to start planning with both levels of government, our partners, tribal councils. There's a lot of work to be done there, but there's a lot of when you talk about partners and neighboring communities, there's tribal councils. There's a lot of nations within Anishinaabe Nation that that need to work together also. So it's going to take a lot of collaboration, but funding to start that process within NAN, and of course that support from both levels of government, like you said, a committee, whatever it may look like. But I'm going to ask Mike to speak quickly here. Mike.
Sure. Thank you, Grand Chief. I think within the current emergency management system, especially with our communities, there's 49 First Nations in NAN, 33 are remote. A lot of times, in an emergency event, it lands on the chief and council. Everything lands on the chief and council. Emergencies, any sort of phone calls, and so this is what we're proposing with what we submitted today is for investments in a emergency management service, that can oversee and deliver a community emergency preparedness program to have on file and to update ongoing community emergency management plans. And so and that's why it was important, and that's why the NAN Executive Council are advocating for, is to have this service in place to oversee and react and be prepared in the case of emergencies.
May, Mr. Chairman, how much time? 30 seconds. So I just want to solidify that we are in agreement with what was said earlier. I want to make sure that's on the record. And second to that is the need to also align the investments that would be attached to emergency preparedness management to actually some of the other infrastructure needs that you have, such as part of your growth plan, in terms of new housing, for example, and the infrastructure that would support that growth for housing and industry and economy and things like that, over and above the investments that you're going to make for emergency preparedness. Would you agree with that as well?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Madame Chabot, c'est à vous pour 6 minutes.
Ms. Chabot, 6 minutes. Thank you very much. First of all, I'd like to thank all the witnesses for their presentations and then the Grand Chief said that the government doesn't understand the reality of the First Nations and their needs faced with the crisis. Could he give us more information on that and what actions the government, the federal government, must take?
I couldn't. Could you hear?
I think, sorry, you wanted us to expand on the challenges and barriers and issues within our communities?
Des besoins.
The needs within your communities.
Said we have not managed to do it yet, the government. So where are the challenges and what are your needs?
Thank you for the question. So, as I previously mentioned, submitting this, our submission that we prepared for today, it's almost looking at emergency management reform due to, our 49 First Nations, 33 are remote, meaning they're only fly-in access year-round, and we have about a window of 1 to 2 months where you have winter road access, and that's where they can bring in, during January, February, March, depending on the season and depending on how cold the weather is. This is where communities can get deliveries of fuel for the year, diesel. A lot of our communities rely on diesel generators, and this is where they transport fuel, housing supplies, and other goods and services. So that is just a few of the challenges that our communities face. There are 6 winter road corridors. That's how large the NAN territory is, and it's up to communities to maintain and build those winter roads with the limited funding they do get. But I think that's just a few of the challenges that our communities face.
And I can expand on that a little. Obviously, we've been preparing for this coming summer and season, and hopeful that the fire season is not as bad as it was last summer. And just working with tribal councils that have led this, we've had certain tribal councils that are strong and in response, and you're never really quite as ready as you want to be, and the surprises and issues that arise that differ from year to year are vast. And but the consistent issues are that there's never preparedness. It's a fire hits, fire starts, the community calls a declaration, and you see it in the news. You see planes coming in, and everyone's rushing, using vast resources to respond to that crisis and fly them out. And and our leaders say, why is the government spending so much money on responding to this when they should be investing in preparing for this? They'd probably save some costs if we were better prepared and worked with us on this on a plan to ensure that we're ready for these crises. And they're only going to get worse. They're only going to increase. And I think it's time that we do something different and create some change within not just NAN, but both levels of government, and work together.
And a number of witnesses have said that even though there are situations that could have been avoided if we had invested in prevention. So what is the role that prevention must have in responding to these types of incidents?
Want to go first? Sure. Yeah, prevention is when it comes to emergency response and these crises we see, I think it's the foundation of everything. It's just being prepared to ensure that first of all, lives are not lost. We've lost people, and we've lost young people. What happens is the families get scattered throughout the province, even across Canada. We've had families in Saskatchewan. You have a community of 2,000 or 3,000, and only so many people can go to one place. So For example, Pakanchigam, a very strong Ojibwe community, goes over to the Cree territory of Timmins area. You know, they don't have translators, and so the resources, those kinds of issues, there's just numerous issues like that, and that support. You know, they get to the hotel. There's no translators. There's no support services, and then the townships are overwhelmed. The municipalities are having to use their resources, their firefighters, their police officers, child and family care workers, you name it. They're using all their resources to support this. So the costs just add up, and the ultimate cost is the loss of life, and we've endured that, and we don't want to see any more lost lives, but you know, it happens, and so I think it's the foundation of emergency response. When we talk about preparedness and response, I think preparedness is so much more crucial and so much more important.
Merci beaucoup.
Thank you very much.
Questions from Ms. Edelhout. Ms. Edelhout, you have 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairperson. Before I raise questions, I'd like to welcome you all. Charlie Angus and Kel Hughes, who are members of Parliament, people who represent James Bay, and Kara Hughes, Algoma, and Kappa Scaling. They send you their greetings, those members of Parliament, as I know you. I will ask Richard, first of all. I will ask Richard. Canada is a huge country. There's always been the issue of the Arctic sovereignty. People from northern Quebec were relocated to the high Arctic for sovereignty purposes. After incidents like that, do you agree that Arctic sovereignty and how it's been addressed or not addressed, or lack of it in the past, what do you think needs to happen that's going to assist Inuit who live in the Arctic so that they will be included in the Arctic sovereignty plans and participation? Thank you.
Thanks for that question. I really appreciate it, especially coming after the discussion that has gone on emergency preparedness, because I think that really flows in really well in the comments of the Grand Chief. Certainly, I think they're all part of the same cloth in the sense that the local communities, the Indigenous communities who have that generational knowledge in a lot of cases and understand what are their interests, what is their local, the changing environment that they live in, that they're observing. I think they are an incredibly important part, if not the most essential part of providing sovereignty to some degree in this area. It's easy enough for me to discuss the Canadian Armed Forces and talking about the sort of grand sort of strategic and the big security issues that we talk about, but many of the issues are very local and they're very particular to the whatever region that you are looking at and the people that are on the ground, right? And I'd like to refer back to the previous panel, which Mr. Hubert or Dr. Hubert discussed many of the same sort of ideas. Is that these have to be locally sort of developed and identified and sort of generated. So to answer your question directly, I think resources are critical. I think that this is and what is identified as being concerns in the region and on the ground must be sort of identified and addressed in full consultation and discussion with those communities there to sort of address those issues and address what does sovereignty mean in those localities.
Thank you for your response. I will now ask Grand Chief Derek Fox and his assistant. Your presentation was very understandable and interesting when it comes to having the proper resources and support to do the jobs that we must do. I will ask you, when you talk about incremental changes, from my understanding, do you feel that incremental changes addressing indigenous issues are not in line with reconciliation?
Yeah, I believe they are not in line with reconciliation. I think it's been it's been many years, and I only say that because we've, as I stated earlier, we've lost lives, and we continue to lose lives due to these circumstances. And we talk about reconciliation. In many ways, it means many different things to different people across the country, whether you're First Nations or non-First Nations. Or Inuit, it's got different meanings, and the incremental change that has occurred has been much too slow for our satisfaction at NAN. We've just lost 3 young people, as I stated in my remarks. And we are unsure about the future, about this coming summer, and hopeful that we don't lose more lives. And once again, it comes back to the preparedness and ensuring that the safety of our people is paramount, and that if our government wants to talk reconciliation, then let's start preparing for ensuring that lives are not lost anymore. That could be prevented. Those lives that were lost could have been prevented if our issues were taken more seriously.
You have a minute and 40 seconds.
Okay.
Thank you. I'm thinking if you can also respond, if Richard could also respond to this question that I just raised. Do you agree that incremental changes addressing indigenous issues are not really in line with reconciliation? So would you respond to that?
The topic, certainly. I definitely believe that in some areas that incremental change isn't sufficient, and in some areas it is. It's much more expansive than the time I have here to sort of discuss, but certainly in many areas that incremental change is not, and we must go much further.
Thank you. I will ask Grand Chief Derek a quick question. What would you like to see as an improvement of the highest priority to you? How we are going to work together in reconciliation and in partnership?
We would like to see, first of all, a service for the North. A committee is the member who asked a question earlier. A committee and a service to ensuring that we are prepared. And that is why we are here today. And of course, I can go on and on about reconciliation and the many things that our First Nations people want as far as treaty recognition and our homelands and jurisdiction and ownership of our homelands and our treaty, honoring the treaties. But with respect to this question, a great first step would be that service and ensuring that, we have support from both levels of government, and of course our many partners who have been there, municipalities and tribal councils and neighboring First Nations, even across the country, who have taken them in, our evacuees, and but we are appreciative of the support that we've gotten so far, but it needs to be more than incremental. It needs to be. It needs to increase, is what I'm saying. It needs to be consistent with the changes that are happening with respect to climate change. The things that we're seeing in the North are things we've never seen before, and you probably see it across the country. You probably see it across the world. And I think the government needs to be consistent with or align themselves with what is going on in our territory, which is what's also going on throughout this world. And they're huge. So I don't know if those changes involve the pollution, those things that are hurting our country and our world. I'm not sure, but action needs to happen. Thank you.
Thank you very much to our panelists, Mr. Richard Chimuka, who was with us virtually, as well as in the room with us, Grand Chief Derek Fox and his associate, Mr. Michael Mackay. We really appreciate you taking the time to come and see us and answering our questions as we continue our study on this very important topic. So thank you very much for coming today. With that, colleagues, we will now pause, suspend briefly as we go in camera. And I just want to mention that I have to leave, and our first vice chair, Mr. Schmale, will take care of the last 20 minutes or so on committee business. Thank you.